My name is Lon Safko, co-author of the Social Media Bible, published by John Wiley & Sons, the largest book ever written on the subject of social media. Today, we're here with John Blossom, the president of Shore Communications and the founder of Content Nation. John is also working on the book Content Nation, which coincidentally is also going to be published by John Wiley & Sons. And we're going to be talking about the book. We're going to be talking about his website and his views on social media. And we're also going to kind of talk a little bit about what he means by the world as a nation of publishers, be a citizen. I think that is really cool. So let's get started. John, could you tell our listeners a little bit first about who you are, what your background is?
Thanks, Lon. Yes, I've been a consultant in the publishing and technology industry for over 10 years, and we help publishers and content technology companies with their marketing strategy, including social media as one of the things that they need to get their hands around. I do a lot of analysis of the content industry. I'm always out there writing on my blog, Content Blogger, and now on Content Nation, contentnation.com, about what the key trends are in the industry. And a funny thing happened a couple of years back when Don Tapscott came out with his book Wikinomics, which is a great book.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on it and thinking about what the real scope of the influence of this social media trend might be. And I thought back to a web post that I'd done a couple of years earlier. And, I noticed something. I started adding up things, if you will. If you start looking at the current statistics, for example, if you add up all the people that are uploading videos in the world, roughly, looking at some stats from Universal McCann International, a major ad firm, there are about 183 million people today uploading videos.
Wow.
184 million people publishing weblogs, 248 million people uploading photos.
Wow. And
272 million people with a social networking profile and services such as Facebook and MySpace and what have you. Now, needless to say, that's a heck of a lot of people. But then, I looked at some other research from Pew Internet, and they looked at, how serious are these people? How many people are just kind of playing around, and how many people really want to do something? And they came up with an interesting stat. They said that 27% of bloggers want to really influence other people's thinking. And that really began to carve into some interesting numbers. For example, if you go out there and you put that number against bloggers, that means there are about 59 million serious bloggers out there in the world trying to influence people.
Wow.
You add that up, and that's the 24th largest nation in the world, about the size of South Korea. If you take it off the social networker population out there, that's about 74 million people. That would make it about the 16th largest nation in the world, about the size of Turkey.
Wow.
So it began to dawn on me through these statistics that there is nation-sized groups of people out there publishing and wanting to influence other people's thinking. And this just completely dwarfs what we're used to through traditional publishing medium. So I came up with the concept of Content Nation. And this idea of the world is a nation of publishers, that what is beginning to make us feel united in common increasingly is this idea of publishing, the idea that anybody can publish anything to anyone in a highly scalable fashion and in a highly accessible fashion through the tools of social media.
Wow. I was going to ask you, one of the questions I had on my list was what is Content Nation? And I never really thought about it that way. When you're looking at 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 million people all with something in common, publishing in this particular case and trying to influence others, you're right. That's as big as some of the major countries, nations in the world. I never thought of it that way. That's kind of staggering.
It is staggering, and we're beginning to see how that begins to scale up in terms of its influence on marketing, its influence on enterprises, its influence on how people live their lives. And those we begin to see, and what I outline in the book Content Nation are some of the major trends that we're beginning to see in those sorts of things, that this is not just about people posting weblogs and getting a little bit of influence. This is people whose influential publishing, either individually or on a mass scale, all of a sudden begins to change how the world happens, how the world begins to see itself. One of the simplest examples I have in the very beginning of the book is the execution of Saddam Hussein.
Huh?
A few years ago, he was tried and was being hung for the crimes that he was found guilty of. And this was supposed to be a very highly controlled event, hush-hush. Well, what happened? Somebody at the execution has a cell phone with a video built in and was able to record this. And that got its way to the Internet, and before long it was completely around the world. So here we had the most powerful nation in the world, the United States, and a sovereign nation, in theory the state of Iraq, unable to control what was one of the most tightly controlled acts by those two nations ever.
Wow.
And, if you think about that balance of control, that really got me thinking about, well, who's really in charge here? The good news about social media, I think, it's not that we're looking at some sort of Marxist thing that's happening.
Right.
There's room in social media for the powerful in the world and the everyday people. And the beautiful thing about social media is that Content Nation is about empowering everybody to work together to make everybody's lives better.
And that's one of the things that I really found exciting about social media a couple of years ago when I first immersed myself into it, is that for the first time in history, as you say, everybody gets a voice. Where 20 years ago you'd have to have a $500,000 or $250,000 budget to advertise on TV, or $25,000 budget to advertise on radio, or $10,000 in newspaper. And writing books, when I went to my first publisher, I was told you got a better chance of getting struck by lightning than to get your book published.
Exactly.
But how cool is this? The tools are for the first time in the hands of the people.
They're in everyday people, and they're also in the hands of marketers and other people who are trying to figure out, well, what is our relationship with people? So it's both that individuals are empowered, but also people in social systems and economic systems are empowered to be able to work with one another more effectively. So we're creating more value for one another. And for some companies, this can be a bit of a challenge, but others, including major companies out there, are learning to accept that this is the way that they need to talk to the marketplace, and learning how to get content out there that engages people and begins to build their brand as a personal brand alongside other people's personal brands. So social media is a very powerful way to communicate with people, but it's also a powerful way for people to focus in very rapidly and effectively on what it is people really need and want, and to be able to understand those needs rapidly and to deliver on them.
Those are really...
one of my favorite examples on that, before I pause again, is Dell. Dell Computer, major company. Major problems in understanding the marketplace because it's just so huge, moving so rapidly. Mm-hmm. How do they find out what it is that people really want, and how do they get it into their products? Well, you can do market research and traditional things, and the life cycle of doing that is so long that you'll miss all your market opportunities.
True.
They created an idea collection website called IdeaStorm, which is a social media site where people who are enthusiastic about Dell products, they use them, can pump in ideas and problems that they're having. People who are a member of that site can click on individual things, vote up specific things that turn them on, and management and people who are working on the Dell side of this portal can look at things that are happening and say, yeah, you're right, we should be able to change this, this, and this. And then all of a sudden, instead of waiting weeks, days, months, years to get some of these changes in, all of a sudden, on a regular basis, you're getting blog posts out of IdeaStorms saying, I think these are the 6 or 7 things that we're going to be putting in this month or week. And so all of a sudden, your ability to have conversations with markets and to understand what it is that people really want and need changes altogether.
And I love that about social media. Doing some research, I found that Nuts for Southwest Airlines blog, they did exactly the same thing. They listened to their customers, and some of the bulk buyers wrote comments in the blog saying instead of only selling 3 months out, you would really do a huge service if you could just move that and sell 6 months out. And that's never been a policy at Southwest. But when they heard the customers actually asking for it, they questioned, why can't we do that? Let's go ahead. And they did, and it was a huge success for Southwest because they simply listened to their customers.
Exactly, and they listened on a conversational basis.
Yeah.
not as in traditional market research where you have the interviewer talking to the marketplace. It's more of a conversational thing of peers talking to peers, and as you're saying, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And all of a sudden, rapidly changing policies that might have taken, forever or a long time in any event to be able to get a large company to change. By the same token, I think that this empowers smaller economies and smaller businesses and smaller efforts at collaboration to come together very rapidly to create value in the marketplace. Because the technology is very affordable or free and oftentimes and highly scalable, all of a sudden people with good ideas can come into the marketplace, get visibility, be able to learn how to converse with the people in particular market segments that matter most to them, and be able to deliver to very niche markets as well. So it's part of what I call the big sombrero economy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're probably familiar with Chris Anderson of Wired Magazine's mm-hmm. Long Tail, where he hypothesized that you're going to have a lot of hits, and then there's a lot of things that are manufactured that kind of dwindle off into very small sales, but at a very high rate. That's all well and good for mass manufactured goods that have a long life cycle.
Right.
But what I see with social media is that we're getting into this curve that's three-dimensional, and it's kind of curving up on the lip there, kind of like a big fat sombrero mm-hmm. that gets a little bit high up on the ends there, and there's a big shady part underneath that lip. Mm-hmm. I think through social media we're creating probably in the long run more net value out of small market opportunities that can scale rapidly to immediate and essential needs that may or may not ever scale into mass market, but in their sum total is probably greater than the mass market. Mm-hmm. So, social media, I think, is helping global economies and very highly local economies to scale very rapidly to very specific needs.
That's absolutely true. Those are really good points. I was privileged to interview David Meerman Scott, the new rules of marketing PR, and he kind of reflects some of your thoughts there, that it really is changing the way we're doing marketing. And the other thing that I'm hearing is, I think if I got it correctly, is kind of the long tail again, mm-hmm. is that you can really make more money on less popular products than you can on the mainstream products if you simply listen to your customers and make them accessible.
Absolutely, and you begin to understand that it's not just a matter of making more out of mass-manufactured stuff, but beginning to recognize that through social transactions you can define needs and wants more rapidly mm-hmm. and respond to them more efficiently, so that we're getting into more of a marketplace where you're talking either mass customization mm-hmm. or never going to mass in the first place and meeting people's needs on a very particular basis more effectively. So, social media, for example, helps handmade goods.
Sure.
It helps people who are enthusiasts for sewing. It helps people in third world economies that might be working on handmade goods, and they're trying to, A, get financing for it, and B, a marketplace for it. So it helps capital transfer in and out of the marketplace efficiently on many different levels. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it kind of changes the way that people just plain live. When you think of yourself as a publisher, the world changes. And, one of my favorite photos I have in the book, I've been compiling all sorts of illustrations in this, in the online version at ContentNation.com, which I hope get in the print version. One of my favorite pictures is of a concert crowd at the end of a concert. And not so many years ago, the tradition was to get an encore performance was to hold up your butane cigarette lighter.
Right.
And now we have the tradition of people holding up their cell phones.
Oh.
And they're taking pictures of what's happening there. And as a matter of fact, Microsoft is now coming up with a product to try to capitalize on this idea of everybody sharing little clips of concerts and what have you. They call it Crowdfire.
Right.
But, this idea that the performer is up there and the audience is responding and saying, guess what, we're publishers too. And so it's, in a way, it's the peers acknowledging the peers and saying, you know what, creativity is just a natural human thing.
Yes.
And we've been used for so long. Creativity in publishing, it has to come from the central source. But in fact, it can come from anywhere.
That's a really great point. In having conversations with Chris Hewer and Robert Scoble, they kept getting back to the emphasis on the word social in social media, that really it's the same thing that we've been doing for the last 10,000 years, whether it started with cave paintings or it's got into cell phones. It really is, let us not forget the human element and the social in social media.
Absolutely. And, I'm glad that you brought up the cave paintings, because one of the things that really brought me to think about this in an even broader sense was the idea of, where did publishing really come from? And publishing was one of the tools that really helped to form human civilization as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
We were going around there and we had informal contracts with people. You give me some grains, I'll give you some bauxite or what have you.
Right.
But all of a sudden, transactions got more complicated. Laws got more complicated, and you needed to organize people. So, my contention in the book is that centralized publishing is what really formed human civilization as we know it.
Wow.
And then, in a sense, it was kind of an extension of our DNA. We kind of leased out our code, if you will, saying, how do we operate as this organism called civilization? And publishing basically became an extension of our DNA. But as highly centralized DNA, that made for kind of a big, lumbering, awkward animal that, kept on getting big and then not being able to sustain itself and falling over.
True.
So, as we begin to introduce social media into our highly technological society here, all of a sudden we don't necessarily have to get big all the time. Our DNA has, in effect, become much more flexible as a civilization. We can be big when we need to be, but when we need to be small, flexible, collaborative, and take advantage of immediate opportunities, we can do so. And in that sense, I think that in a certain way, we're going back to our Ice Age roots.
Mm-hmm.
As people who were able to take advantage of things on the fly, we're in a way now like our Ice Age ancestors chasing the mammoth.
Mm-hmm.
Going out there, taking opportunities as they come, taking advantage of natural abundance rather than artificial scarcity as a way to sustain our economy.
Being adaptive.
Yeah, being adaptive and being able to focus not on saying, I've got this and I'm going to make it hard for you to get, but rather be able to say, there's lots of stuff out there. How can we find the best stuff now and share it? And I think that attitude that comes way back from our hunting roots is being reflected in a lot of the collaboration and sharing of opportunities and rewards that we're seeing in social media.
And that's really true. I mean, if you look at some of the ancient tribes that are still in parts of Africa and South America, it's only a few members of the tribe that actually goes out and hunts and brings back all of the meat, and that gets shared with the entire community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in the book, I take that out to the nth degree. I look at some of the things that we do in basic human organization, and at the end of the book, I have a little bit of fun, and I say, well, gee, if that's the case, if really we have the ability to organize so flexibly and yet also on a relatively instant base like modern civilizations, gee, we could do a lot of things in the future, couldn't we? So if you have patience, get to Chapter 10, because I take you into the future of social media 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now. And I won't go through the details now because it's kind of science fiction anyway, obviously. But I think it'll get people thinking. It's kind of fun.
Well, I found the summary on your website really fascinating. Matter of fact, I just read that particular blog just a short time ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about your website, why you founded it, and how it works, and the purpose?
ContentNation.com is open for anybody to join because we are a nation of publishers, and I want this to be the town hall, if you will, of social media, where people can come in, discuss topics. They can post blogs if they would like. We try to filter out the PR stuff, But if you've got a topic that's really cool on social media, you can post it in our blog. You can participate in our forums. You can comment on the book chapters. And my presumption is that over time we'll develop together another book between everybody in the world. And who's to say what a book will be by the time that we're doing that? But it's a place where everybody can get together and be part of this nation of publishers that's out there. And, of course, in the meantime, I'm out there pumping my blog. for people to look at, and I comment on what's happening in social media, and try to frame it in a way that makes sense to people who are trying to profit from social media in their business and personal lives.
Wow. And I noticed that you're a strong proponent of user-generated content and crowdsourcing and getting information from the people that participate in your blogs. How does that work into the book? Are you using some of that information? Are they influencing?
I've discovered that there's kind of a pump priming factor here.
Yeah.
And as I think a lot of authors discover. And so, I actually did use social media to get quite a few ideas for the book. But it turned out that I was using tools where I had social networks already in place. So, a lot of the content in the book was bootstrapped up from questions that I put out on LinkedIn Answers, queries that went out on Facebook, things that were pumped out from my weblog and the newsletter that's collected from it. And, at first I think that kind of worked out a little bit better for starters, because I think it takes a while for people to be able to say, yeah, I am a publisher, I am a part of Content Nation. I think once the book hits and people begin to get it as a result of having read the book and having buzzed on the book a bit, I think that we're going to see a lot more citizens coming forward. And I have some ideas that I'll share at a later time as to how we're going to get people putting the flag lapel pin, so to speak, on for themselves and say, yeah, I really am a citizen of Content Nation. So I look forward to the citizens stopping by.
And that's one of the things that we kind of struggled with when I did the original design for Social Media Bible. At first I thought, okay, well, we can do crowdsourcing like some of the other books out there where we basically ask people to really write the chapters, contribute, and then kind of format it. And when we looked at some of the other books, We Is Greater Than Me, and we saw the lack of voice, we decided that probably wasn't the approach that we were going to take. So what we ended up doing initially is bringing in over 1,000 people, volunteers, to come in and take a 20-minute survey to basically tell us, what kind of book do you want to see? Do you want just another business book? Because I thought originally the Social Media Bible was going to not be a Bible, but a 250-page business book. What we heard was they wanted 2 business books and a guide. The tactics, what the heck is social media? Middle part of the book, they wanted a guide. Who's playing in the social media field? What are the names of the companies? Give me some information. And then the last part was, how do you actually apply it? And the cool thing is that I don't think anybody could have really foreseen that would be the structure of a book. Wiley's never done one quite like it, and I've never participated in a book like that. So I love the user-generated content, because it really is greater than me.
Yeah, and that's a great way to do market research. I think what happens when you develop a book in social media, however you do it, you develop conversations. And I think you're right, just in terms of how books are edited and what sustains somebody reading a book versus reading a blog, you do need that common voice, I think, oftentimes in a book to be able to pull things together. But, what is it that really makes people feel that the book is useful? You have to ask them.
And again, in the interviews that I've done in the past, it keeps coming back. No matter how sophisticated, the 2007 SEO World Champion, Robert Scoble, it keeps getting back to content. Listen to what your readers want, or your customers, or your prospects, and just simply give them what they're asking for. But if you don't listen, you don't know what they want. And Chris Hewer says, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them proportionally. Absolutely.
And that's why when I'm blogging, I love to listen to the comments. If you're blogging, I think one of the greatest faux pas you can do is not to respond to every good, valid comment that's on your weblog, because it's really about sustaining the conversation and validating that everybody that puts a comment on a blog or wherever the post may be is as valid a publisher as you are. You have to be able to affirm the conversation.
And that's a really good point that I kind of never thought about. You would kind of assume that you would want to address both the positive and the negative comments with a thank you or a rebuttal. But that's absolutely true. In a conversation, everybody gets a chance to speak. One person doesn't speak after each person.
Yeah. Sometimes you may have a negative comment on a blog. But you can address that politely.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that I need to watch sometimes on my blogs is PR posts.
Yeah.
I think the greatest enemy of social media are people in companies who have decided to use it as a way to put out messages and information that's really not about a conversation. It's really about dictation.
Yeah.
It's really about trying to push a centralized message out through as many channels as possible, and use blog post comments and social networking groups as alternative syndication channels.
Yeah.
And that's really not the way to do it. It's more important to be able to let the real value that comes through social media through natural influence and endorsements that come through natural social relationships to be able to shine through.
And that's another good point, too. Amanda Vega and I were talking, and the morning that we interviewed, she said that she had gotten included in a LinkedIn from someone, and we won't mention any names, but they had blasted everybody, all of the connections in LinkedIn with, hi, this is what I do for a living, I'm available for consulting, I'm available for speaking, click on my link, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And the term she used is, boy, did she get flamed. And appropriately so. That's not what the intention is.
Yeah, there's appropriate venues for that sort of thing. But whenever you're doing things in social media, be you a company, an individual, or any sort of organization, you have to remember that it's pretty much like being at a conference. Mm-hmm. And you might be, if you wouldn't go into the middle of a circle of people talking in a conference and do something like that.
Good point.
You might be up on a stage and have a few minutes of people, being welcomed to provide some sort of commercial message like that. But in general, in a conference, that sort of thing is not really welcomed.
Well, any more than a bunch of people sitting down at the table at lunch.
Exactly. So, minding your P's and Q's that way is a very important thing. And it affects writing style enormously. Not only has social media encouraged people to have more of a brief conversational style in their blog posts and what have you, mm-hmm. but it seems to filter over into general journalism and writing as well. And to a certain degree, it's difficult to say at times, how much speech is influencing writing and how much writing is influencing speech.
True.
And changing into this almost texted style of communicating with one another. Keep it brief, keep it cogent, get your point across in 20 words or less, or 140 characters, I guess, to be exact. Mm-hmm. And people oftentimes will understand exactly what you mean and respond.
And one of the things that I noticed, it did change according to traditional publishing, where you would kind of build the story and give the punchline really at the end, where it's kind of reversed that now. Tell me what you want to talk about, let me read it, and then if I want more detail, I'll continue to read the story.
Exactly.
That was a major change for me to understand that.
In a sense, the world has become very good at writing headlines.
Yeah.
As well. I think if you look at what's been happening with some of the breaking news on that's been coming through on text, either directly in phone text or on services such as Twitter, mm-hmm. the world is getting a lot better at being able to make its point. And that used to be a real art that was, well buried in a newsroom yeah. of a major news organization. Now all of a sudden everybody knows how to write a good 80 to 100 character headline.
And that's been a problem for me.
Get a story's point across.
Yeah. Trying to keep anything I have to say in 140 characters or less has been very stressful.
Twitter has taught me a lot of things, I must say.
Before we go, can you tell us a little bit about, you said you work with the publishing industry, and my experience with the publishing industry and working with John Wiley and Pearson, mm-hmm. I'm seeing a lot of changes being influenced by social media. Can you give me kind of a success story or some of the things that you're working on?
Yeah, I think some of the things I'm seeing in the publishing industry comes from my bias, I suppose. I grew up in electronic publishing. For a while, I did work in a publishing company that had newsletters, magazines, as well as the research that I was working on at the time. So I'm familiar with the traditional publishers as well. But my publishing roots go back to Wall Street.
Oh.
I grew up with real-time tickers and scrolling news and what have you, and that's the way that things were done.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's kind of funny as I see companies wrestling with social media. In a sense, on Wall Street, many years ago, I was working on social media well before it ever finally trickled out to the web.
Yeah.
Because markets are conversations, as we know from the Clue Train Manifesto. And you go into your typical securities trading room, and especially in the old days, and many places even today, they had what they called a squawk box,
right,
where people were shouting into a microphone to other people on telephone circuits back in those days all over the world to be able to conduct deals. So, when social media came along and I read the Clue Train Manifesto back in '99 there, all of a sudden it kind of clicked to me very quickly, wait a minute, we were doing this for a long time. So when I look at my customers, I oftentimes am looking at it from that perspective of saying, well, we've been doing conversations for a long time. How do you do that? I think some of the success stories, I can think of in terms of what's happening out there in publishing are not necessarily from the traditional publishers. I think if you look at what's happening in trade magazines, if you look what's happening in consumer media, you're seeing comments, you're seeing well-organized communities. There are a lot of good things out there, but to me, a lot of the action is what corporations and small businesses and individuals are doing in terms of success stories. And the tools that help them build those sorts of things, I think, are one of the real success stories that are out there. And one of my favorite is the GM Fastlane blog, where you have senior executives from General Motors going out there and talking enthusiastically about their products. So you have Bob Lutz, who's one of the chief proponents of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles out there,
right,
saying how jazzed he was to just drive one of the prototypes. And so to me, the ability of marketers to be able to communicate more directly through media such as social media, I think that's one of the big challenges that's out there in the publishing industry today. As good as many of the things that are happening with traditional publishers, things like that are happening. Then on the enterprise side, it's also interesting in that publishers that used to have databases of information that people would search through and they'd pay a good penny for that sort of thing. All of a sudden, it's more about getting content integrated into collaborative systems inside the enterprise.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, they're kind of challenged to come up with better price points, more value add, I should say, with social media tools there. So you have folks like ProQuest that have come out with tools that make it easy for people to build their own research databases, if you will, and to build them collaboratively. You have Nature Magazine that's out there with a social bookmarking tool that helps scientists be able to pull together research from all sorts of different places. Things of that sort, I think, are indicative of there being a lot of value out there for traditional publishers to pursue, but in a much different way than they've been used to.
That's really true. That's a great insight because information is power. And with the things like Wikipedia and some of the other vertical wikis, you know what? I use those sources. I use them often. I just jump to the internet to gather my information, where 10 years ago you'd have to have LexisNexis or some other type of research, which was very, very expensive. And the small, medium-sized companies just could not afford that.
Yep. And it's also rethinking how you're packaging existing stuff. If you think what O'Reilly has been doing with its Rough Cuts program, where people used to wait for the big fat technology book to come out, and they still do that. But in Rough Cuts, people are able to subscribe to the content as it's being built, and that's been a boon for technologists who need the most up-to-date information on cutting-edge technology. And the subscription to the book, in a way, turns out to be kind of an advanced seminar, if you will, interacting with the author as the content's being built. So, this whole idea of being able of saying that, well, in books we assemble the material, then we edit it, and then we put it out to everybody, and then it's consumed, that gets blown right out of the water. And all of a sudden, what is content? What is a book publisher? A book publisher is somebody that is able to monetize and market effectively the content that an author can produce. no matter where that content is in a particular life cycle.
Mm-hmm. And they've not been known, that's not their strong point.
I'm sorry?
Marketing is not really publishers' strong point.
Well, we're putting out books for publishers, so I guess I have to be polite on that. But,
well, I've heard them say that, or I wouldn't repeat it myself.
Yeah, I think, and to your point earlier about how you're talking about collecting information on the book, when you go out and ask people, what is it that you think is going to be successful for this book? You're basically pre-engaging your marketplace.
Right.
And saying, oh, good, this is what I want.
Well, yeah, you designed it.
In a sense, and I'm taking a slightly different angle with Content Nation, and conversing with people, that I have drawn materials from my LinkedIn research and things of that, building up the conversation, and then feeding the book back to them and say, what do you think?
Excellent. I love that. That's the epitome of social media. I love it.
Yeah.
So, John, can you tell our listeners where they can find out more information about Content Nation?
You can go to contentnation.com. And when you land there, you'll see our blog post. You also see it says read the book. So I encourage you to go read the book. It's there.
I love
now.
it.
Go out and read Content Nation. And when it comes out in more, for some people, more convenient form, in an official book from Wiley, go out there and gift it to all your friends, because that's what we do with content. We go out there and
sure.
We use it in different forms for different social purposes. So there's lots of good social purposes for buying that book, Content Nation, but in the meantime, we encourage you to come to contentnation.com and be one of the many people around the world who are now citizens of Content Nation.
John, that's great insights. I truly appreciate it. I'd really like to thank you for being here today, truly.
Oh, it's my privilege, and I look very forward to being part of your project.
How exciting. So today we're here with John Blossom, president of Shore Communications and founder of Content Nation, the website, and the aggregating author of Content Nation, the book, also the author. And it's also published by John Wiley & Sons, and I appreciate you being here. And this has been Lon Safko, the co-author of the Social Media Bible. Please be sure to check out the other valuable media tactics, tools, and strategies that can be found in the Social Media Bible book and its companion website, www.thesocialmediabible.com. For more information on me, Lon Safko, please by all means go to my website at www.lonsafko.com. And really, truly, again, John, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks again, Lon. My privilege.